Hello, my name is Carl Sommer, and I will be giving a presentation on the Humanities Department at Veritas Classical Academy. So let's begin. First, the mission of Veritas as a whole is to disciple students to delight, discern, and display the glory of God in Jesus Christ in every area of life through classical Christian education. Now, there's a fundamental point here because our humanities classes allow that vision to be accomplished. And the way that we're defining humanities is a set of academic disciplines that study what man is in relation to God, others, and how we ought to live. Humanities studies include ideas and cultures throughout the ages and includes the study of literature, history, language, fine arts, and philosophy, all in light of God's word, because, as we stated earlier, a classical Christian education. Now, math and science are also really important in our academic disciplines that study nature to delight, discern, and display the glory of God. And the humanities and the science department are not in conflict, but actually complement one another in maximizing the human capacity to delight, discern, and display God's glory in Jesus Christ. And one of the really neat ways that this is seen is actually the ways in which, so for example, I also teach logic classes in the way that logic incorporates with the sciences, and how even as we study doctrine as a Bible class, as we get to the study of creation, how inevitably we're brought back to the sciences and the appreciation of that chemistry. And it's really fun for the students to realize that the humanities classes connect with the science classes as well. Now, specifically at Veritas, we pursue really two questions. The question is out of Psalm 8, what is man that God should care for him? And the question of how we should live in relation to the gospel and the good news of the church. And at Veritas, the disciplines of the humanities include Bible, history, literature, Latin, logic, rhetoric, and philosophy. And we engage those questions in a chronological exploration of human culture. And by studying the causes and consequences of different answers to these questions across time and cultures, students gain an understanding of the power of ideas to shape human life and thought. And as the famous adage goes, ideas really do have consequences, and we get to see that. Whether that's the way in which the early Christians incorporated a new vision of humanity, or whether the loss of God really led to the death of a culture, as Nietzsche famously was pointing out. And also, in every humanities class, students will practice the arts of attentive reading, skillful writing, and dialectical or logical back and forth Socratic dialogue, a type of engagement that is courageous and charitable. We do not want to create students who can just get really mad. We want to create students who can articulate their position and love their neighbor as they're communicating with them, which we desperately need in our culture right now. And so, as a result of these disciplines and these studies, we hope to cultivate these things: a love and discernment for goodness, truth, and beauty, to develop skillful reading, to enter the great conversation, to wonder at the world and not to despise it, to be trained in seeing how in God's providence all things work together and hold together in Christ. As Paul said, in him we live and move. We want to be able to train students to realize that. We also want to prepare students for scholarship and what it looks like to get excited about literature and to love literature and to love Shakespeare, Plato, and go and keep reading these people. We want to instill that in our students. And one here we really emphasize is we want to help students learn how to be happy and how to provide a map of making sense out of our world and what it means to live a meaningful life in Christ, and um, to enjoy God, and what that really looks like, and help students figure that out in their own personal manner in obedience to Christ. And we also, in relation to that, want to help students pursue a genuine self-knowledge. We want students to know themselves and to live a examined life, because that's what a good life is one that is examined. And so we hope through our humanities courses and really pray and focus on these things that students will develop these. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk about how these various disciplines function in regards to the larger goal. And so for the Bible, we use the Bible as the ultimate standard by which all other knowledge is organized and evaluated, and the chief means by which God and his purposes is known. So our Bible program is essential for giving us a grounding to work through the other humanities. Now, the history is a study of in the words of Augustine, the city of man and the city of God, and to see how those things inevitably come together and sometimes are in conflict, and help students work through an understanding of a Christian understanding of history and where is God in the midst of it, and what is he doing, and where is he leading it ultimately. So history is also fundamental. Now, literature is a luxury and fiction is a necessity, according to G.K. Chesterton. And the role of literature is to help our imagination to more vividly grasp the total reality of God's reign. So we want to use literature to realize that the world is much more beautiful and bigger and wonderful than we ever realize, and that people are more wonderful and brilliant and kind of have their own bad streaks as well. I mean, for example, students will read Brothers K and you will see the goodness of man, you also will see the depravity of man. And it's important for our students through our humanities classes to realize the heights and lows of what man is capable of. And this also relates to another humanity, which is logic. And this is the art of reasoning and of understanding the relationship between different parts and objects and subjects, really, which is also incorporated into all of our other subjects. And rhetoric, wonderful rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion, that we want to help our students learn how to not only think well, but be able to express their thoughts well with ethos, logos, and pathos. And Latin, we take very seriously the study of language, and Latin develops an understanding of the structure of language and provides the roots of English words and opens a gateway to a wealth of wisdom of the past. To be able to read Boethius's poems at the end of each chapter of the Constellation Philosophy. We want students to read that and be able to appreciate the Latin of that and the wonder of that. And philosophy, we want our students to know philosophy. And what we mean by philosophy is a genuine love of wisdom, a treasuring of wisdom, the search for wisdom, and a way of life, a Christian philosophy where we can delight, discern, and display God's truth, goodness, and beauty. Once again, we take very serious this call of the mind and to love God and to use every parts of our mind to really treasure wisdom, because it is the most valuable thing. And this is just a quick overview from 7th to 12th grade about what humanities classes are taught at what point. You can see the history trajectory, the literature, the logic and rhetoric, and the Latin, and the Bible. And I don't want to go too much into this, but feel free to pause the video and examine this if you like. This is also available on our website as well.
Good evening. My name is Kate Kim, and I am the head of the Veritas Math and Science Department, and I would like to welcome everyone to our first virtual open house. Tonight, I would like to take this opportunity to give you some overview of our Math and Science Department. I would like to start off this evening by reading our school's mission statement together. The mission of Veritas Classical Academy is to disciple students to delight in, discern, and display the glory of God and Christ in all areas of life through classical Christian education. And it is our department's goal also to help the students to just do that. I read from a book once that classical education is grounded in piety and governed by theology, which is to say that biblical truth is both the beginning and the end of Christian classical education. And this is no different in the field of mathematics and science. We believe that having the right biblical worldview with the right theology is so important in understanding who we are in this world and how this universe works, for it is God's truth that governs this universe. So here are just a few of the important aspects of biblical worldview in math and science. First of all, we believe that this world was created by God and it was good. In Genesis 1, chapter 1, God says he created the world and saw that it was good. And the fact that it is good, therefore, also means that it is good for us to study it and find out and discover more about it. So if people believe that matter is evil, then they won't be inclined to investigate it. Second of all, we believe that God is the sustainer and the governor of this universe. Therefore, we expect this world to behave in a certain way that is governed by our God. And this universe is regular, orderly, and rational. And if people believe that material behavior lacks order, then why bother studying it? And lastly, we also believe that God is the fount of all truth. Now I would like to talk about our math and science department goals. And once again, our mission statement says we want to disciple our students to delight in and discern and display God's glory. So how do we help them to delight? As we study the created universe, we are impressed with its mathematical and scientific order. Creation, which is governed by mathematical and scientific laws, reflects the character of the one who made it. And in addition, the consistency of mathematical and science truth demonstrates the orderliness, precision, and consistency of God's nature and character. I also teach some upper high school math and a couple of science courses here at Veritas. And sometimes we have these aha moments with the students. Maybe perhaps after just discussing about how bonds are formed between elements in a chemistry class, or how we can use sinusoid curves to describe all sorts of electromagnetic waves, or use derivatives to pinpoint a speed of a particle that is moving freely with varying accelerations. So I love it when students begin to recognize how beautiful they are and that how they are the reflection of His glory. Einstein once said that the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible. And in these moments, when we realize God gave us tools like mathematics and science to be able to comprehend His created world, students begin to see and delight in His glory. Second of all, to discern. As a tool for studying God's creative handiwork, mathematics and science helps us to discover God's creation laws and patterns, and also deepens our understanding of who He is by awakening our wonders concerning Himself and His created world, and also by sharpening our minds to think clearly. So mathematics and science can not only help us to discover who God is through studying the universe surrounding us, but it also deepens our understanding of who He is by sharpening our minds in the way we think. So in today's culture and society where truth is no longer relevant, it is so much harder to discern God's objective truth and moral standards. And Plato believed that the study of mathematics leads the mind toward pure reason and cultivates the true love of wisdom. And he believed that by training one's thoughts on the perfection of mathematics, the mind learns to transcend the level of changing opinions to identify objective truth. He also believed that mathematics is therefore the best preparation for anyone who will need to think clearly. Thus, through the discipline in mathematics and science, it helps our students to discern God's truth. To display. The Christian student should thus master this wonderful gift to advance Christ's kingdom on earth and embrace a greater appreciation of the work of God as expressed in His creation. Through deeper appreciation of who God is, it is our goal to help the students to walk daily with God with much more love and passion for Him, and also make it their aim to advance Christ's kingdom on earth through their future vocation. And this also will display God's glory. And how do we do that? Well, we could do that by being good stewards of this world that He entrusted to our care, and also by loving our neighbors. And how do we love our neighbors through math and science? Well, one of the examples maybe is to do some research that help produce more food around the world to feed the hungry. Or an obvious one might be to doing some research to find cure for the diseases. So these are some of the ways that we could love our neighbors through doing math and science. And here's our approach to math and science. We divide into three categories. So wonder. So in order to delight in God's glory, we want to help our students to wonder in awe of his creation. And we also, in order to discern, we integrate other disciplines of knowledge to math and science, including theology and philosophy and history. And also, in order to display his glory, students are taught with mastery of concepts in mind. So here is our math sequence. We start off here in 7th grade. This is our regular track, pre-algebra, and then 8th grade algebra 1. Advanced track that will start at algebra 1, 8th grade geometry. And they are getting ready to further build their foundation for more advanced mathematics in high school at this dialectic stage. And then in high school, we call that rhetoric stage. This is our regular track that will start with geometry and then end at calculus AB. Or if you're in advanced track, then you'll be in algebra 2, 9th grade, and then you'll end up in BC. And all these placements are done through testing. And all our textbooks are by Saxon, and there's a reason why we chose Saxon, but I'll try to explain that more when I talk about math as a subject later. And here's a science sequence. In science, dialectic stage, the 7th grade, we do physical science in 7th grade, and then earth science in 8th grade. And they also have science fair projects that they do every year. And this is the science sequence for our high school, or we call it the rhetoric stage. In 9th grade, we start with physics, and then 10th grade, we do biology, chemistry, and then in 12th grade, we have a class called the natural philosophy and science history. This is a brand new class that we just started this year. All natural science textbooks are by Novare, the physics, biology, and chemistry, and you probably have noticed that our sequencing is a little bit different from the traditional sequencing of science, which usually starts in biology and moves to chemistry and then ends with physics. But the reason why the sequence is like this is because of the sequence that's done by Novare, the curriculum that we have adopted. They do have their own reasons why they do it this way. If you want to find out more about that, you could go to their website, novarascienceandmath.com here, and then you could read about why they do physics first. And also here, you notice that we have this class called the Natural Philosophy and Science History. Well, the reason why we added this class is because in our society today, where science is given the ultimate authority over many different areas of life and culture, we felt the need to give our students proper understanding of what science truly is and also of its limits. And according to the authors of the book, The Liberal Arts Tradition, natural philosophy offers students today a critical opportunity to hone their arts of reason in discussion of the natural world. When all the arts are employed, natural philosophy teaches students to think properly and promotes true wisdom. So we felt like we really needed this class in order for them to really think properly and place science in its proper role before they actually moved into the world by going into college. And also through teaching them science history, we wanted students to be aware of how the modern science has risen. And it places the science, again, in its proper place and also in the context of worship as well. We currently do not offer any AP Science courses here at Veritas, and perhaps this is something we might still consider in the future, but we felt like many AP Science courses leave no room for natural philosophy or history of science due to their packed content. It is often taught with just one goal in mind, and that is to get a high score on an AP exam, and we felt like it really did not fit well with the principles of classical education. But again, this is something that we could review further in the future. So today I just want to, that was a very brief overview of math and science, but I just want to end this overview with this quote that sort of like captures, I guess, everything about math and science here at Veritas. So here's a famous quote by Nicholas Copernicus, and this is what he says. He says, "To know the mighty works of God, to comprehend his wisdom and majesty and power, to appreciate in degree the wonderful workings of his laws, surely all this must be a pleasing and acceptable mode of worship to the Most High, to whom ignorance cannot be more grateful than knowledge." So this is why and how we deal with math and science here at Veritas. Thank you.
Welcome to Secondary Literature Open House at Veritas Classical Academy. I'm Mrs. McKeever. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we use literature in classical education. So classical education obviously places a high value on studying the great books. Great books are the classics, the masterpieces of literature that have stood the test of time. In literature classes, our students study several works of classic literature each year. As we read these great stories, we discover the universal questions and struggles of humanity, and we find out that we're not alone. Other people have asked the same kinds of questions we are asking, and they've been trying to answer them for thousands of years. That means that reading these stories can give us new perspective. C.S. Lewis wrote that in reading great literature, I become 1,000 men and yet remain myself. Like the night sky in the Greek poem, I see with a myriad eyes, but it is still I who see. Here, as in worship, in love, in moral action, and in knowing, I transcend myself and am never more myself than when I do. As we enter into the great conversation with these great thinkers and writers of history, we get to go heart to heart, mind to mind, and gain wisdom directly from the source. Neil Gaiman put it this way: books are the way that we communicate with the dead, the way that we learn lessons from those who are no longer with us. That humanity has built on itself, progressed, made knowledge incremental rather than something that has to be relearned over and over. There are tales that are older than most countries, tales that have long outlasted the cultures and the buildings in which they were first told. Our 7th and 8th graders have been digging into some of those stories, among them The Song of Roland, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Beowulf, and Macbeth. These stories share some common themes, and the questions that we are especially looking at are questions like, what's an honorable person look like? What are the virtues of an honorable person, and how do we love God and honor the king? How does literature help us to approach those ideas? Our 9th and 10th graders are studying American literature this year, and it's impossible to study American literature without bumping into the concept of the American dream. We started out with such lofty visions, lofty goals, and every once in a while it's important that we step back and take a look at those and see how well we're living up to them. And our literature actually helps us to do that. We studied, in addition to many short stories, poems, and prose of the early American writers, we dug into the major works of The Scarlet Letter and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And as we read through our literature, we're seeing that this one question keeps popping up over and over again. Do we aim for utopia? Utopia is a word that means literally no place. Or do we find a way to shoot for utopia, which sounds exactly the same in English, but when you spell it with an E at the beginning, it means good place. And again, we're going to dig into our literature to try to answer some of those questions. Who do you think is the most heroic of all these characters? We've done Roland, we've done Gawain, we've done Beowulf. and we've done Macbeth. Who do you think is the most heroic? Personally. There's not a right or wrong answer here. Landon.
Personally, I think Roland is the most heroic out of all the characters because he was the only one who laid down his life for his king.
Okay, nice. Anybody else? Have a different answer? You guys didn't like reading Roland very much, but he was a cool guy, wasn't he? All right. Okay, what makes a hero in our society today? Sam.
I think a hero in our society today is a person that fights for like a good cause, such as it could be serving in the army, or it could also be a celebrity that backs like an organization that is very good. So in our society, there's different ways of being a hero, but each of them are serving a good cause.
Okay, good. So, do you guys think that our idea, our concept of what a hero is greater or less than the concept in the Middle Ages? Is our concept of honor bigger or smaller? Ryan.
I feel like in the Middle Ages, the concept of a hero was very tight. Like you had to be an absolute paragon of goodness. But I feel like in our society now, we're more like, oh, they fight for a good cause, that makes them a hero. Well, in the Middle Ages, it's just, oh, you have to follow all of these vows of knighthood.
Yeah. So you feel like we've diluted it a little bit? Yeah, interesting. Excellent. So what's your honor code? Somebody tell me, what's your specific personal honor code? What are the things that, the virtues you want to uphold in your life? That's a harder one, huh? I'm not surprised everybody went shy on that one. Is that a no? Nobody's taken that one? Ben.
Some virtues I would like to my life is gentleness, staying true to myself, and just being God-centered.
Nice. Gentleness, being true to yourself, and God-centered. I love those. Being true to yourself, that's another way of saying integrity, isn't it? Okay. So, in our society, we don't have kings. What's a modern equivalent to that role in our society?
Like in our society, we have people of power. So like people with like politicians, we have the president in the U.S., but also celebrities.
Interesting.
Like a lot of celebrities have an impact on the people's lives and their role models. So they can also be considered heroes or the king.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, Ryan.
In America, I think it's honestly more of like the masses or the king. Whatever they think is right, it is right. Like it has that sort of ideology.
That is really an interesting point because we're dealing right now in our culture with this kind of surge of grassroots democracy, and it's kind of brutal, isn't it? Okay, how can we show honor to the ones that God put in authority over us? Because we're probably not going to go and fight a battle at Roncesvalles like Roland did, or tear the arm off of a monster like Beowulf did, right? So how do we bring that home? How do we show honor here, now, in the circumstances that we have? Stacy.
There's like a pandemic going on, like one day like the doctors that are working really hard and like we take care of the people who are sick.
Okay, so there's the compassion part. I love that. What else? What else can we do to honor the people that are in authority over us? Yeah, Sam.
I think the most common way people today honor the people in authority over us is by serving in the army or armed forces.
Armed Forces is a great example of a group that has a very large honor code, right? It's a big part of their lives. How about where you live? In your house, are there people that God has put in authority over you? What's a good way of showing honor there? Landon.
I feel like what you said, how at home people are placed in authority and personally for me, and probably everyone here, their parents. And the way that we can show honor to them is by respecting them and obeying what they say, because even though it may not be best for us, well, it may seem that way, but we should still obey them.
Nice. So that's really the place that it's hardest to bring all that stuff, make it real, isn't it? When it's like in the nitty gritty of our everyday lives. So that's where honor really counts the most. So I like that answer. Awesome, you guys. Thank you so much.
The founders of a new colony, whether utopia of human virtue and happiness they might originally project, have invariably recognized it among their earliest practical necessities to allot a portion of a virgin soil as a cemetery and other portions as a site of a prison.
In my drawing, I depicted the three main characters in the Scarlet Letter, burdened by their overwhelming guilt and shame caused by sin. On the left, Pearl is bound by a Scarlet Letter A. For Pearl, it is a little different, since she is the literal embodiment of Hester's sin. In the middle, Hester is burdened by the Scarlet Letter A on her chest. Hester's sin is out and exposed, while Dimmesdale's gingerly covers his own Scarlet Letter. But because of this neglect and disregard of the sin, he is slowly bleeding out, which I can argue eventually led to his death.
Puritanism and Pharisaism get a bad rep. Both movements actually began with noble intentions. The Puritan movement in early New England and the Pharisee movement in the interbiblical period both wanted to defend the purity of value, principle, and truth. The values that they sought to defend were civilizing and contributive to social order while allowing true advance. It was when the Pharisees in their age and the Puritans in theirs lost the distinction between reformation and annihilation that they confused reform with repression and became menaces to the societies that they were trying to save.
Attempts to repair this damage by means of human ingenuity or technology or social, political, and military power is as old as Babel. The dream of utopia, of a perfect human society that fixes what is wrong in the world. However, the problem is defined, always unravels because it can never truly fix what is wrong in us. Such utopian societies will almost, in the end, resort to violent control and subjugation of its citizens to maintain order and to keep those with power in their positions of authority.
If we cannot create utopia, we can try to create e-utopia, which contrasts with utopia. E-utopia is an achievable and realistic version of utopia. Utopia deals with an unrealistic and fantasized perfect society that cannot be created. E-utopia takes the society and or world that we have today and attempts to make it perfect and good. E-utopia accounts for the natural, negative nature of man and strives to make the best out of what's present. For example, Huckleberry Finn talks about how kings are kings and can't be changed, while one who desires utopia can hope or want the kings to be morally perfect and righteous. E-utopia would take the imperfections and make them work. In short, if utopia with a U cannot be achieved, we can strive to make better what we have in front of us.
Ouch. Volleyball is fun. Time passes by so quickly. Every day, much fun.
Snow globe. Snowflakes all around. The miniature people. Christmas is now here.
Growing plants in dirt, they are eaten by the chicks, at last to be fried.
Math is really hard. Dropping my GPA. Mrs. Kim, have mercy.
The beach, calm and still, cold water beneath your feet, no voice, peace at last.
Flower, colorful, lively, loving, dying, hurting, thorns, pricking fingers, roses. For he has given all reasons to be thankful, thanks to the highest.
Sitting as the time goes by, hearing the click, tick, and talk, only to give a heartfelt sigh, dreaming of a sun-dyed dock. And waking up to the cool breeze, staring blankly at the roof, everything around me sees, empty-minded, all aloof. Watching as the sun peeks through, in a line like balls of string, almost like a drop of blue created by a glowing ring. But here I lay, passing time, as the skylight reaches its prime.
I am thoughtful and observant. I wonder about how my future will be. I hear serenity, I see Narnia, I want to be happy. I'm thoughtful and observant. I pretend I'm invincible, I feel the power in flight. I touch the stars, I worry about abandonment. I cry from stress, I'm thoughtful and observant. I understand the Pythagorean theorem, I say there is hope for everyone. I dream for opportunity, I try to be my best self. I hope for peace, I'm thoughtful and observant.
A sneak into my dark, sorrowful past shows up when you just think you made it through, always hoping that the moment won't last, and like a flower, it grows inside of you. The world around you slowly passes by while hoping the reality will stop. I think while looking into the night sky, in life we need to give it all we've got. My mind is spinning so fast all around, and I try every day not to feel blue. Not a day passes by while not feeling down. You ask how to stop it, I have no clue. This is the story of a kid whose dreams were just never meant to be as it seems.
We are consumed with bitterness and hate, controlled by human nature's ignorance, too far away from heaven's perfect gate, unworthy of his sweet deliverance. Yet he, out of his care and graciousness, sent down his Son to die a gruesome death. He, who only had love and righteousness, hung on that tree of shame till his last breath. Through this, mankind is saved from Hades' doors. His cries and tears brought life and laughter near. Yet still, for man, he fights a spiritual war, telling mankind, fear not, for I am here. We, who are not worthy of his great love, receive the best from our Father above.
The Poetry Fridays that we had in Rhetoric class once every 2 weeks were fun, but not just because Miss McKeever brought in treats, although they were really good. These days were when all of our classmates and I could enjoy and experience the joy and satisfaction of writing poems with each rhyme and perfect combination of syllables. This process allowed us to reflect on the things that we have learned previously in this class, as well as other classes. It showed us to appreciate the various poems and poets as we realized how hard it is to write a decent poem.
I really enjoyed Poetry Friday because it was something I look forward to after a long day of school. It was a time I can finally rest and write poems, which I actually enjoyed doing, not to mention the snacks we got to eat. I really enjoyed the thought of Poetry Friday, and I think it was a really good decision of Ms. McKeever to add it.
Poetry Friday really entertained me and probably my other fellow classmates too. Not only because Mrs. McKeever provided us snacks, but also because we needed to express our feelings, emotions, and thoughts in a unique way. For example, like writing haiku and sonnets was very fascinating, and it actually made me enjoy writing poems.
I look forward to Poetry Friday every other week, not only for the food that Ms. McKeever provides us, but the time that she gives us to use our creativity to the max. And I think the hour and 30 minutes spent thinking and mapping out a poem has shifted my brain into viewing the world from a different perspective. The use of rhetoric in poems has helped me structure my essay and improve my choice of words. I think just being able to spend time with my classmates and my teacher is what I enjoy most about Poetry Friday. I also like the fact that poetry has no limits, and it all depends on how far your imagination can take you. And I also like how Mrs. McKeever brings food for all of us to snack on while we try to creatively express ourselves through poetry.
I enjoy Poetry Friday because the days we do this gives me a sense of what a good and fruitful class is like. When I envision a good class, I imagine one that is not dreadful but rather enjoyable, one that feels freeing in the midst of learning. Poetry Friday allows me to learn without feeling burdened. We all enjoy each other's company and Mrs. McKeever's yummy snacks.
Poetry Friday was not only fun for me, but it was a period that I would look forward to because it was a time of expressing my creativity while being in a relaxed condition. It's nice to spend a period without worrying about burdensome work, and it's fun to work with words and connecting them with the circumstances that we are writing about. Logos is important because it is necessary for an argument to have reasoning behind it, or else the audience will not be able to understand the effectiveness of your point. Pathos is essential in order to persuade the audience through evoking their emotion to your own favor. If emotion is not included in your speech, then the overall message will be dry and it won't make the necessary impact. Finally, ethos is significant in communication because it establishes credibility. Without credibility, it is almost impossible to expect the audience to believe in what you are saying. There is no point in trying to persuade your audience if you are not credible yourself.
Through Mrs. McKeever's class, I realized the importance of being able to express yourself rationally, logically, and emotionally. It completely shifts the audience's attention towards what you're saying and makes your argument stronger and more appealing to the audience. Once your credibility is established and the logic of your argument is understood, and you have captured the emotions of the audience, you basically won.
Whether we notice or not, we use ethos, pathos, and logos in our daily lives. But by being mindful and catching these components being used, I realized that I was able to be more convincing and more confident when I talk to my fellow peers.
Hi, my name is Mrs. Lash. I teach history at Veritas Classical Academy. I teach for the 7th and 8th grade as well as the 9th and 10th grade. One thing that makes history different in a classical environment is really our focus and our methodology. So for example, the first thing you're going to find at a classical history class is a lot of reading and studying of primary sources. The reason we do this is because we have a strong value for ad fontes, or returning to the source. Rather than Mrs. Lash tells you what happened or your textbook tells you what happened, let's read the words of the people who lived it at the time. Let's get to know them and let's see what they have to tell us. And then we can piece those things together and figure out what was going on and why, and really get to know these figures in history. Which leads to the second big distinctive is we use a great man theory of history, meaning history is shaped by humans, fallen, flawed, sinful humans, making decisions in the context that they live with the constraints that they're given. Oftentimes history is taught as a confluence of forces, whether it's political, economic, religious, social, cultural influences that move and shape history. But we believe that people move and shape history. God is sovereign over all, and people make decisions. Nothing in history, apart from God, is inevitable. So why did they make the decisions they made? Was it a good decision? What was the context? What was the constraints? What were they facing? We want to get to know them through their writings and through their own personal story, not in order to judge these people by our own context and by our own values, but we want to get to know them in their time and see why and what they did that affected history greatly. And finally, we study pivotal events, big events in history on which history hinges. Had this particular event, say the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, not occurred, American history looks a lot different. So why was that event so pivotal? What did it change? Why is it something worthy of study? And the reason we focus on pivotal events is because we want to answer the question of how did we get to here, to where we are now? Which means we mostly focus on Western civilization in our history because we're trying to answer the question of how did we, who live here in the West, get here? What came before us? What events led to where we find ourselves today? And as we study that long, long story and get to know all of the players involved, we hope to create an appreciation within the students of all that's gone before them, and therefore to give it to them as an inheritance. All of the things that have happened, everything somebody has fought for in the past is now yours, and it's your job to carry that torch to the next generation. The students really seem to enjoy it. I think it's a successful way and a great way to teach history. I love it. It gets us away from simply the idea of dead, cold names and dates on a piece of paper. We want to get to know these people and we want to know their story and why it matters. Thanks.
An oval slightly tilted back. Draw an articulated, that means like a stick figure, to get the pose just right. Use a guideline on the bottom to make sure that his foot and his knee are touching the ground at about the same point. If you want to use a ruler on this, you can go around the stick figure to fill out the body. Don't do the armor or the shield. You have to get the body right first. So give him some muscles, give him some skin, give him a hand, thighs, calves, foot. fill out his body. Here's his arm. You notice right here they have the arm is not quite finished because a shield is going to go there. So our students wrote a paragraph on determining who in fact is responsible for the death of Thomas Becket. They had several suspects between the king, his knight, Thomas himself, the bishops, and they had to take a position on that and had to write a well-argued paragraph vis-a-vis who is responsible. So my students are going to read, a couple of them are going to read their paragraph stating who they believe is responsible ultimately for the death of Thomas Becket.
I believe that King Henry was to blame for the death of his best friend. One example that can support this is the treaty that Thomas and Henry were to sign that Thomas kept postponing until he was finally forced to. This displays Henry's ignorance and immaturity as he refused to sign the treaty with Thomas. Adding on to this, Henry was one of the many people who were responsible for Thomas's anger. For example, as Thomas anointed his son to become king, so that there would be no question of the king after he died, he asked the Archbishop of York instead of Thomas to anoint his son. This connotes that the pridefulness and again the immaturity of Henry. So sorry.
You're right. Keep going.
Should I restart?
Just keep going.
I'm going to edit it. Just keep going.
You're good.
This connotes the pridefulness and again the immaturity of the king as he let a disagreement come his way of his relationship and the archbishop and the rituals that usually took place. However, you could argue that Thomas was to blame for his own death. It is revealed to the king's bishops that Thomas had excommunicated them. This brought anger to the king, demanding that the troublesome priest be taken care of. Hearing this, the knights took initiative, killing Becket in the very cathedral he preached in. Therefore, we conclude that Henry was to blame for the death of Thomas Becket, his best friend.
A great bishop and Christian leading man has been killed, but the question that has to be asked is, who is responsible for the death of Thomas Becket? I think that Henry II was to blame. This can be supported by the king not even listening to his requests and pleas. He made many big decisions of Thomas's death in a rage, and he basically got mad at his own court for someone not killing him. So someone in his court went and killed him. This suggests that all big decisions of Thomas Becket's death were made by Henry II. On the other hand, I think that Roger of Point Levecourt was a big part of his death. For example, Roger was going to prison, and he promised that he would make Thomas fall. He had a lot of money, so he paid a bunch of people to write letters to the king. He sent people to warn the king that Thomas was trying to overthrow him. This demonstrates that it was Roger who got the king in a rage to basically kill Thomas. Although, from a different perspective, Thomas might be the one to blame. This can be highlighted where Thomas would only follow God and not the king. Another time is when he stayed in France longer than he should have, and that made the king mad because he told him to come back, and Thomas made many enemies. This indicates that it was Thomas's response or reactions to the king's questions and requests which made him a liability, and he had to be removed. In conclusion, we may never know who was truly responsible for the death of Thomas Becket, but I think that Henry II, Roger of Point Levecourt, and Thomas Becket himself are big candidates.
Hello, my name is Mr. Sommer. I am a humanities teacher here at Veritas, and today what you'll see is an introduction to this new unit in a class known as Great Ideas. Great Ideas is a part of the history track for 11th and 12th graders, which is basically a survey of intellectual thought from Plato to around Aquinas. And today what you'll be seeing is we've finished up our units on Hellenistic thought, so Stoics, Epicureans, and we're now transitioning to Christianity. And a huge part of this idea is we want to make sure students understand how different and how intense it was for Christianity to kind of take over the thought world of the Greco and Greco-Roman world. So we're going to be starting with an examination of a painting, and this is really important for us here at the Humanities program at Veritas because we want students to be examining paintings, beautiful pieces of art and music and all those things, and realizing that these have truths to give. And so we're going to be examining a painting, and students are going to be examining that painting and trying to figure out how this painting is a key part to understanding how Christianity transitioned. The students have not seen this yet, so it'll be very interesting to see what they arrive at, so you'll get a good indication of what they know and all of those things as well. After that, we'll be moving to a central question, and then we'll be using a essay from actually a non-Christian author, which is really great, explaining how Christianity kind of took over this whole world and how Christianity ended up, why would someone become a Christian over a Stoic or Epicurean? And then we'll be taking 2 essays from a book by David Bentley Hart on how Christianity allowed for a new version of humanity, a new way of seeing life and the good life in relationship to Christ. And that's what you'll be seeing today. So, Hannah and Isaac, what idea from Plato has been the most transformative for your life?
This year from Plato, the idea that was the most transformative for my life was his concept of justice as the proper ordering of the soul. I think it just really showed me that as long as I have disordered loves, or as long as I fail to constantly orient myself towards God first and foremost, and as long as my professed faith as a Christian fails to inform my decisions and actions, then I won't ever be truly just or happy. And so that way I think that concept of justice and how integrated it was just was the most transformative idea from Plato for me this far in this school year.
Well, for me, I really like the section when Plato talked about the purpose of education, which is to turn and transform our minds into loving what is truly true, good, and beautiful. And it's made me more grateful for the education that we have here at Veritas, because we're trying to reframe our education in terms of what Plato said here. And just through Plato, Aristotle, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and other people, I just learned what it means to live like a good life, and it's really transformative for me.
Great.
Hello, my name is Carl Sommer, and I am one of the Bible teachers here at Veritas Classical Academy, and I will be explaining to you the kind of ins and outs of our Bible program. Let's begin. First, the goals of the Bible program. The first goal is to equip students to discover the truth, goodness, and beauty of God in the ways that God works and relates to all things, which culminates in the action of God in Christ. And so this emphasizes discovery and faith. The second goal is to enable students to discern the truth, goodness, and beauty in the world while recognizing falsehood, badness, and ugliness in relation to the person of Christ. So what this means is we want students to recognize that the person of Christ gives us a framework to recognize both truth and falsehood, goodness and badness, and beauty and ugliness. And this emphasizes discernment and hope. The third goal is to disciple students to display the truth, goodness, and beauty of the Christian worldview in their own personal development of virtue and wisdom as they follow the example of Christ. And this emphasizes display and love. Now this brings us, as before I go on to talk about the distinctives and values and purposes and the ways that we accomplish those things, I hope that in doing this, I'll also explain what makes Veritas unique or distinctive, because we see ourselves to be distinct in the full-orbed concern for transformation of a life in the intellect, the emotions, and desires through classical methodology. And this is important because we don't want mere reformation, but we pray God would use our program to transform your child into the image of Christ, and the emphasis on transformation. And that's what we truly desire, and I believe that's also one of the things that makes us unique. But how do we accomplish these goals that I stated before? Well, the biggest thing is teachers and mentorship. We strongly believe that modeling through the example of the teacher in word and deed provides one of the best ways to form children. And we take this from Jesus, who stated in Luke 6:40, which says that a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. And we take this very seriously because your students will become like their teachers. And so we take very seriously our teachers, and we take very seriously mentorship. We also have intentional discipleship that happens through this year-long process where students go through a specific theme for each year, and they're required to journal and practice this, which means they have to create a plan, they have to act out those plans, and they have to reflect on those plans. And teachers will read and give Jesus-like instruction and feedback to lead them into a deeper love of God and others. And these themes coincide with the Bible classes. So in 7th grade, we have study skills, which teaches them how to open up their mind to intellectual virtues and the life of the mind. And then we also have, for 8th grade, virtue and wisdom is the emphasis. And 9th grade is Christian exemplars, which matches with our church history class. And in 10th grade, we have vices. And 11th grade, spiritual disciplines and Jesus's parables teaching / Sermon on the Mount. And then 12th grade, we culminate this activity in journaling and discipleship through vocation and service. And another thing that we do in relation to the teacher is we understand ourselves in loco parentis. And what that means is that teachers are seen as second parents almost, where we believe that we're responsible for your children. We love them and we care for them deeply. And another important part in relation to the parent is that we see our jobs in service to help you disciple your children, because you're the main one. You're the main one responsible. The parent's the main one responsible for discipling their children. And teachers are encouraged to be in conversation with parents about the needs of their children as they get to know families of their students, and questions to ask and things to say in classes to help the child to be formed according to what's going on. So we really see our job as teachers to be in partnership with the parents to instruct and lead the child. Now, another important thing is we have a 6-year Bible tract, which goes from Old Testament, New Testament, church history, doctrine, hermeneutics, and apologetics. And these 6 years are really, really important because we see ourselves working through this long period of time, and we get a long time to work out these ideas in the child's life. Now, another way that we accomplish these goals is through our curriculum of integration with other subjects and also great authors. In our school, the Bible is integrated throughout all other classes. So, for example, recently this past week, 1 Corinthians 13 was being memorized in the 11th grade ancient literature class to embody real love in response to Lewis's rendition of the myth of Cupid and Psyche. And it was such a wonderful thing to kind of see students doing that. And another thing is that the Bible classes also include the best possible teachers of Christianity and Scripture that we have access to, our 2,000 years of faith going before us, and we take advantage of that. So students read Augustine and Basil and Gregory the Great and Luther and Calvin, St. Benedict, St. Francis. All of these figures we read because we realize that Christianity is best seen through our brothers and sisters who intentionally sought to follow Christ. And we really seek to imitate and honor them as they sought to imitate and honor Christ. And this is so wonderful to see because it really opens up students to a more beautiful way. And it's really fun to see. And I love being a part of that. And I want to now talk about maybe some of our teaching that's unique. We really emphasize memorization and catechism, because we can't expect students to discover God's truth if they don't know it or can't recognize it. And we also can't expect students to discern the truth if they don't know the truth. And so memorization plays a huge role. We also create catechisms for our classes to help for memory and retention so that they can use that over time and not just forget it. And another big thing is we incorporate art and poetry and music to facilitate discovery, discernment, and display. And this is really fun because we have students looking at wonderful pieces of art like this and allowing them to see the beauty and grandeur of Christ. I mean, just look at this incredible painting of the resurrection. And we also want students to be reading and thinking out poetry. I mean, the great poets, even the hymns that we have access to, is just, they're too good not to be used to form us, and they were meant to be. So we take full advantage of that. And we also have students creating art and poetry and music, and then sharing that out as a part of our goal for display. And I had a student that wrote a song about Revelation that it was so beautiful and incredible, and it's so awesome to see these things. And we love seeing students share the goodness and truth and beauty that they discover through this process. That's one of the big ways. Now this relates to the classes that we have over 6 years. And what I mean by this is we have a Socratic dialogue over 6 years. What I mean by that is we take a long view towards discipleship and discussing the central questions of Christianity. And students are lovingly questioned by teachers, and students lovingly ask questions of teachers in order to discover the truth of Christ and discern whether he's good, and ultimately be brought to a realization that the beauty of Christ is real as they live in him. And we also encourage students to count the cost and to really make Christianity internalized in their own, and not just something they believe because of either the teachers or their parents. Now, we realize that we're not God, and only God can form them, but we actively seek and pray that God would lead us towards him. And we put our faith in him ultimately. Now, one other thing is we don't just do Socratic dialogues, we also encourage Jesus in the way that he would challenge students. And so all those students are encouraged to ask questions and seek after truth. We also realize that according to the example of Jesus, students must also be challenged to act and repent. This painting is one of my favorite examples of this, is Peter has to humble himself in order to receive Christ. And this is oftentimes what we see as our job as teachers, is to help our students come to a deeper humility and a deeper awareness of their sin. And sometimes that requires correction. And we don't shy away from that, because that's an act of love, and that's our job, to love them into the truth. And it's a really wonderful thing. Now, and lastly, the last thing we really emphasize is mission and service. In the last couple of years, we really want to encourage our students to not only love the things that they've learned and become it, but also to share. And this comes back to the central thing of displaying. And so this culminates in assignments where we give students assignments where they have to serve family, neighbors, communities, to be involved in their churches. We encourage students to come out and imitate teachers who are serving the least of these, whether that's students or individuals who students would normally avoid. We want to encourage students to go and serve the poor, go and serve the least of these people in our society who are looked down upon, and to be the hands and feet of Christ unto them, because that's our ultimate focus. Is we don't just want to create really smart Christians, we want to create really smart Christians who love the world and love people, and who want to give their lives for them as their Savior did.
Stacy, how have your Bible classes shaped your education?
So since at this school the majority of the curriculum is actually based off of the Bible, by studying and analyzing a lot of the text, it gives us as students a better understanding of what we are studying, and it makes us critically think, and it helps us pay attention to the little details that are embedded into the text. Because the Bible is such a complex book, no matter how many times you read it, you'll keep getting answers, you'll keep asking questions. So by turning every page, you'll get another question. By turning another, you're going to get an answer. So by reading the Bible, we are able to better understand and think and ask questions and analyze what we are studying, what is the curriculum, why are we studying it. And another thing that I think has definitely helped us is that in our class, we are actually studying the epistles and letters of Paul, and we have been studying and finding textual evidence for some of the themes. And one of them I wanted to bring up was unity through Christ. And the reason for this is that because we, as like one school, we are all united in one way through Christ. through faith. We all have our differences. We're not all the same, but we are all brothers and sisters of Christ through the faith. And I think that through that we can help each other through brotherly love. And that has one way that through learning Bible as a class itself has definitely helped shape my education here at Veritas.
So Hannah, Nara, Joel, and Andrew, how has the apologetics class helped you to gain a new appreciation and understanding of what Christianity is?
Well, for me, I think the idea, the what we learned about how important studying theology is was really the most transformative for me. Since before this class, I always was asking myself why I study apologetics or doctrine, and I can just believe in God and just, I thought that was how it works. But then after this class, I learned that I should actually view theology as a map that should guide me through my faith and show me where I am in my journey towards God. Like, how am I supposed to know how much I love or desire God if I don't really know that much about Him? So that's what was really transformative for me.
Right. What about you, Andrew?
I think one of the values that I get out from apologetics is just learning the deeper meanings behind just Christianity in general. And one of the greatest things that J.K. Chesterton brings up is that he says that Christianity is like a liberating religion that frees non-Christians from their cage sins from their cages. And I think the biggest idea that I can pull out, and it's a really important idea, is that this idea truly helped me understand that Christianity is a more liberating system of our own sins rather than just a limitation to our own desires. And from this idea, we can take the values of what J.K. Chesterton and all the other famous Christians says to give non-Christians a perfect perspective on what Christian actually is. Because a lot of Christians today, they perceive this idea of Christianity as very limiting their own desires, mainly because we're sinful beings and we're unaware of that our desires are sinful. But I think this idea of liberating Christianity can be very good for non-Christians and even Christians as well.
Great. Nara?
I really agree with what you guys said, especially Joel, because I think that apologetics, it's so valuable because it really does defend your faith. Because I think one of the biggest fears that I kind of have is if there's a really smart atheist, secular, not Christian person and they're challenging me and I don't know how to respond, that's kind of sad, you know. So not only is it a duty as Christians that we should respond, you know, in a way that expresses the truth that properly reflects our religion. If I can't do that, you know, that's just also what is that to say about me, right? So and it's not something you can really get from every Sunday Bible school, because they teach you, they teach you the content, but they don't really teach you the stuff that we learn about in Chesterton and Lewis and stuff behind it. Also I think Christianity as a religion, it just started to make more sense to me when I started to learn about it, because we learned about how it provides us with meaning that you can't get from just from conforming to secular worldviews. But it also made me realize how weird it is, because right now in Great Ideas, you know how we're shifting from Stoics to Christianity, and how crazy it was that they're how the Logos, the divine, is incarnated into this one person that you have to put all your trust in. Yeah, so I'm kind of rambling, but sorry. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I really like what you mentioned about Christianity making the most sense. I think this year apologetics has really showed me how Christianity is set apart from any other worldview, just because the other worldviews fail to make sense out of every aspect of life, whereas Christianity does integrate every aspect of human life, even the seemingly contradictory parts of human life, such as pain and pleasure, or sorrow and joy, reason and emotion, individuality and community. While other worldviews have a hard time showing how these things are integrated and tend to emphasize one over the other, Christianity just makes everything into a unified whole. And like you said, it just makes sense out of everything we experience and know in our lives. And I think that's what apologetics has shown me this year.
Great, great, great.
Hi, I'm Miss Glozier.
And I'm Miss Richardson.
And we are... okay. Okay, we got do you want to say, like, that we are...
Yeah, I'll yeah.
And then I can jump in.
Okay.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Hi, I'm Miss Glozier.
And I'm Miss Richardson. We're the Latin teachers here at Veritas Classical Academy, starting with grade 6 all the way up through AP Latin.
And here at Veritas, we spend most of our time in secondary teaching our students. Wow, okay, hold on.
Okay, we're gonna cut that then.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we do like this? Why don't we say something like, what
Here at
introducer
Veritas-
says, we'll talk about that Latin, you know, we
Everyone
teach, that
says-
you and I teach 6th grade all the way through AP levels
Okay.
of Latin. And then we can go into that here at Veritas, Latin is a required subject or language. And that there's often the misconception of, If you want me to say that, that's fine.
No, I just got really nervous all of a sudden.
Okay.
No, my brain was like, it was like short circuit. Okay. Wow. All right.
Okay, so in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, I'm Miss Glozier.
And I'm Miss Richardson. We're the Latin teachers here at Veritas Classical Academy, teaching from grades 6 all the way up through the AP levels of Latin.
Here at Veritas, we have all of our secondary students learning Latin, and there's often this misconception that it's this dead language, where in fact the learning of the grammar, the rules of the language, the history and culture just really enriches a student's upbringing and their ability to engage in the world and with each other.
Right, so Latin is often considered a dead language, however, it's still very much alive. It's a mother language, and it helps us to better understand not just the English language, which 60% of the English language does come directly from Latin, but it also is a great stepping platform for students who are curious about other languages as well, such as Italian, French, Spanish, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of our students have even mentioned that that's something that they'd love to look into further along, and they can see it kind of embodied in those languages as they travel around to different locations.
Not only with the grammar and the vocabulary aspect of Latin, but Latin offers a great opportunity to be able for a student to travel back in time and really just engage with the great minds and writers and orators of the past. And through this, they have a better appreciation for antiquity history. And there's so much that comes with antiquity history, such as the long-lasting influence with broad geographics, so they learn about geography. They're learning about government, so not just ancient government, but also modern government. And it also ties in with cultural aspects, religious aspects, law, and engineering, cultural values.
Yeah, and they get to tie that in with their other classes as well. So just studying Latin in this language that's so rich, so beautiful, they have points of contact with all of their other classes in humanities and even in math and science as well. As those writers were philosophers and mathematicians, things like that. And they just really get to engage with the goodness, truth, and beauty that is present in this life. So my Latin 1 students have been working on creating an original Latin poem, and they're going to go ahead and read those for you now.
Ambula et vidia, sol consurga, ambula magna, video ili oceanu, ambula ad ignud, video flos, ambula ad me domum, paterfa partum, video me familiam, comprehenso eram.
Ego cogitabam video bo non. Flucti adveniint ad solo viti. Illa flucti pellent contra alio. Ventus isti volo per callo. Ego cogitabam sentiam non mollis terra in meis pedibus. Saxa in litore piscis natant per aqua. Ego cogitabam videbo non pulchram litem.
What do you like most about learning Latin?
I think the classroom experience makes Latin really enjoyable. In addition to all the games and exercises we do, it makes Latin really fun, as well as allowing us to collaborate with each other so that we're not kind of by ourselves just translating a piece. And then on top of that, it allows me to apply it to outside of the classroom. Like when we're studying for the SAT, we can recognize vocabulary better. And especially for those who want to go into the medical field, I hear that Latin actually makes it easier.
What do you like most about learning Latin?
I can go first. First of all, like, Latin is a very challenging subject for me personally. It makes me really think about what I'm learning. It challenges a lot of what we are learning, the translations and like activities with each other. Like, we do games. We like mess around with each other. So I feel like that is like one of the best things.
Okay. So what I personally like about Latin is like all of the things I learn about are what I already know when I discover Latin, like our own language, like how different vocabulary words are derived from Latin, and how like the form of our sentences are also derived from Latin, and here's also just like I can't stop referring to words with Latin like definitions. Like I can't say subject without thinking of nominatives. Yeah. Okay.
Learning Latin shaped your education.
So a lot of people tell me that Latin is just a dead language and it has no purpose. Like people tell me, oh, you should learn French or you should learn Spanish. But then what they don't know is that Latin is the root of all these Romantic languages, which includes Spanish, French, and English, which is what we speak. And so Latin has really helped me shape my vocabulary and my grammar, which is crucial for my literature classes, my rhetoric classes, and virtually all my other classes. And so it really taught me to appreciate how important it is and how much it has helped.
Alright guys, on the count of 3, ready, and a 1, and a 2, and a 3.
Virumque anochoiae qui primus laboris Italiam fato profugus lavinia veni litora multi leteris iactatus et alto vi superum salvae memorem non isopiram.
Perfect, guys.
Hello, my name is Mr. Sommer, and I am a teacher of logic at Veritas Classical Academy. And I would like to explain largely what we do here at Veritas and logic and all of those related things. So let's jump into it. First off, what is logic? The way that we define logic at Veritas is logic is the science and art of reasoning. Now, it's called a science because it studies the patterns and laws of thought that can properly lead one to truth. And we refer to it as an art because, like an art or a skill, you can cultivate it with proper use. And then you can also deploy it once you've acquired those skills. And reason, I'm just going to define as the faculty of the intellect. Now, of course, these things are debatable, which is fun. You know, you would use logic to do that. Another definition would just be the science and art of argumentation. So that's what I mean when I speak of logic. Now, this is important because this leads us to, now that we know what it is or how I'm kind of defining it, we can think about what the value of studying logic is. And before I go any further, I want to kind of do an experiment with you that I like to do with my students. So occasionally I'll have a student or two who asks me, you know, what's the value of logic? And I love that question because it opens them for this experiment. Now, let's just say that student thinks that logic is not valuable. I like to do this with them. So to argue that logic is not valuable is to use logic, ironically. And the better you argue against the value of logic, the better you will, or the more you'll need logic. And thus you end up in this weird position to argue against logic or its uses to use it. And the funny thing is that as you get better and better at arguing, then you will also come to realize that you need it. And you'll grow and you'll kind of grow out of that idea and you'll come to realize the benefit of it. And this is just a fun thing to do with students. And ironically, this applies to grammar and rhetoric as well. And so it's just a little experiment where you realize that in arguing against logic, you prove its value because you're using logic to prove logic is not valuable, which is an irony. Now, but let's move on to some more concrete things. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of things here quickly, and I'm just going to state these and move on. And like I said, if you'd like to pause it, then feel free and read it and look at it some more. But the value of logic is that no matter where you've lived or when you've lived or who you live with or who you are, you will use logic. Because we all seek to persuade someone of something at all times. And there's this idea by Lewis that I like that he speaks it in reference, C.S. Lewis in reference to theology. And he says it's really not a question of whether you'll use theology or not, but just whether or not you'll, use it poorly or not. And I think something applies similarly to logic. It's not a question of whether you use it, it's just whether or not you'll use it poorly or not. Logic is also extremely practical because it helps with the reading. Proper reading requires us to understand the argument of the author. And like I said, we do that all the time. It also helps with writing. Kreeft has this article or this quote that I like where he says, "It's impossible to communicate clearly and effectively without thinking clearly and effectively." That means the study of logic. I think that pretty much sums it up. So it's practical. It's also eternal. This relates to the previous point that rules of logic don't change. And this gives us a great comfort because then we can build upon them and use them without fear that they'll become obsolete. So I think logic also has eternal value. Now, it also has an educational value. See, logic provides the foundation for all higher studies. Science is literally the application of a specific logical method. Theology is kind of the science and methodology of thinking about God, philosophy, law, mathematics. It all requires the use, and people who go into these fields benefit from a deeper understanding of logic and the proper use of it. And so in learning logic, students are prepared for their future education. Now, there's also something here that's important, which I like to call the sources or authority problem. And it basically goes like this. There's so much information out there that logic is required in order to make sense out of which authorities one should trust or not. We can't just keep Googling things. There's so much stuff out there. And you can't just pick something because it's that one. And even now, there's notoriously famous examples of bias and all these other things going on. So we need to be able to use logic and to sort out which authorities we should trust. Now, this may surprise you, but logic also has a moral value. And this is because we all desire to be happy. And we may even know what happiness is, but even so, you will still have to order your life according to that image or that goal. And thus, even in the moral life, logic is required to order your life according to its proper end. And that's a huge skill, to order yourself properly and to organize your life and not just your mind. And we actually go through that, you'll see later on in some of the logic classes. This is one of my favorite points. I've learned this recently, is logic also has civic and political value as well. A quote by Thomas Jefferson says this: "In a republican nation whose citizens are to be led by reason and persuasion and not by force, the art of reasoning comes of the first importance." Thus, reason rather than force should be the main means of arriving at one's political views. And if that's not applicable for today, then I don't really know what else is. And it also has spiritual value. God calls us to exercise all parts of ourselves to know and love him. And whether you like it or not, God has made you rational, or he's made all of us rational. Thus, to reject this part of ourselves is to reject his mandated plan for our lives. To exercise this gift is to actually be more in line with his plan for you and for us, and thus to have more joy. And this is also important because it's no surprise that many find the Christian life dissatisfying, because some people think that they have to leave their reason at the door, they have to leave logic at the door. And I think they're right about this. They realize reason is central to who we are, and we can't just abandon that. And as I stated earlier, there's no way you can do theology without studying logic. In fact, you can't really do any systematic thinking about God without logic. That's just kind of the way that it is. Now, okay, so like I said, I've kind of went through that very quickly, and you may be thinking, okay, sure, it's valuable, but what does Veritas do to make sure that these students achieve these values? And in other words, you're asking, okay, great, but how do you do that, right? The how question. Very granted, that's a great point. First, we have to understand that logic it plays a fundamental role just for the very structuring of our school. Classical schools largely follow what's known as the trivia, which is divided into grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar is usually for the elementary schools, and logic is for middle school usually, or even up to 9th grade, and rhetoric is high school. And logic is basically grammar gives the facts that students are to memorize. Logic is, in essence, putting those things together. And then rhetoric is displaying and articulating those thoughts for the sake of persuading an audience. And so logic plays this fundamental role in giving the students the logical skills required to discern the truth. And it also prepares them for rhetoric by helping them arrange their arguments in such a way that they would be persuasive. And one of the three big themes for rhetoric, logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos is logic and the arrangement of arguments. And so I kind of like to think of it as the hinge by which classical education turns. But first, just so you understand that, logic plays a crucial role in classical education. And so we really care about it. And I just want to make one other point here is most schools teach critical thinking, and I think that's wonderful. But oftentimes it can become just a buzzword and without an actual plan to implement it. And at Veritas and majority of classical schools value logic enough to give it 2 years of instruction. And logic is also integrated and built into the high school years. And there's another thing here, but just understand, like, some schools mention critical thinking, and I think one of the distinctives about Veritas is that we don't merely say, oh, critical thinking, but we actually give time and structuring to it, and we call it logic. Sorry, I have to say this point. Another point that's important here is usually schools emphasize critical thinking without realizing that the end of critical thinking is to discover truth. Critical thinking is not an end in itself, but rather a means for discerning truth. And at Veritas, truth and wisdom is the end and purpose of studying logic. We don't study logic for logic's sake. Anyways, that's just I think it's really crucial for us because Chester has this quote that, we open our mouths to close it again upon good food. And we're not meant to keep our minds open the whole time. We're not just meant to learn and learn and learn, but we have to, or have critical thinking and critical thinking and critical thinking. But the purpose of having critical thinking or logic is to be able to close our minds upon truth when we find it. And that's crucial because I think in a lot of schools, we don't always see that. But here at Veritas, we really try to emphasize that truth and wisdom is the end of studying logic. Okay, great. So, and I still haven't answered the question, but I just really care about these points. But how do we do this? Okay. Well, this is important. We have 2 years, of course, and in both years, the 7th and 8th grade year, we take the first semester to teach a system of arranging arguments, specifically deductive arguments. And this first semester is meant to teach the theory of argumentation using deductive logic. And in essence, this is where they learn the science of reasoning well. So in 7th grade, we have them learn something called categorical deductive logic, and in 8th grade we have them learn propositional logic. But we realize that that's not all of logic as we defined it earlier. In the second semester, we use and implement the theory of argument from the first semester, but we also emphasize more practical reasoning, if you want to use such a term, where we actually emphasize debating and verbal and written argumentation. And here's where students learn the skill of reasoning well, the art of reasoning well, by a lot of practice. And some activities included in the second semester is policy debates, where we have a resolution, we have to affirm one side or the other, and they're in teams. Moral case debates where they have to reason about a way that an agent should have acted or not acted. The 5-paragraph essay, we use this to kind of entrench the deployment of arguments with the use of claim, evidence, and explanations of how the evidence supports the claim. And this is really important for later rhetoric. And we also incorporate inductive and abductive in the 8th grade level, which is statistical, or abductive, which is like inference of the best explanation, reasoning, which are crucial for later mathematics and also crucial for the sciences. And the most exciting part about this for me personally is all of these different types of reasoning, and all this comes together in the last bit of 8th grade, which culminates in the writing performance of Socratic dialogue, which requires the use of all of these forms at once to be deployed as needed. And so we read some Socratic dialogues by Plato, and we also read Peter Kreeft's Best Things in Life. And this is such a fun thing to see, and one of the most exciting points. And this also lays a foundation for one of the main instructive methods that we use in the high school, which is Socratic discussion. And so this is the way that we do this and accomplish the vision of logic and the value of it in our students.
Hello, my name is Kay Kim. I'm the head of the Veritas Math and Science Department. I also teach upper high school math courses, including pre-calculus in both AP Calculus AB and BC. And I would like to take the opportunity tonight to talk about what we do and how we do mathematics at our school. Here at Veritas, we believe that even seemingly neutral subjects like mathematics must be taught in the context of a biblical worldview. We make it our aim to help our students to delight in, discern, and display God's glory through all things learned here at Veritas. And this includes subjects like mathematics as well. And here are some basic principles of biblical worldview for mathematics. First of all, mathematics is given by God and discovered by man. It is not man-made. And the reference is found in Colossians 1:17, Proverbs chapters 2 through 6. Next, mathematics has its origin in God's unchanging, orderly, beautiful, and triune nature. Some mathematical principles describe God's active governance of his creation. Some mathematical principles, such as those found in geometry, represents the God-given order which is seen in creation. And God has given mathematics as a tool by which we may be held accountable to each other and to God. Mathematics can be properly understood only when studied from a Christian worldview. And like all other subjects, mathematics should be studied to glorify God. And lastly, the study of mathematics ought to strike a balance between wonder, work, wisdom, and worship. And here's the philosophy behind mathematics. Mathematics being an expression of the order seen in nature, and nature being an expression of the logic that is in God, it follows that math will show the logic and order of God. Ptolemy wrote that the mathematical sciences were the best evidence of divinity because of their consistency and incorruptibility. Math goes past the outer layers of creation, seeking to understand one aspect of God's character, numerical order, and logic, as manifested in what man calls the fundamental laws of nature. Therefore, math, like science, sees God through creation. The difference is that math only looks at the parts that are so well understood they can be reduced to an equation. And this is the philosophy behind how we ought to approach and understand mathematics here at Veritas. Here is our approach to teaching mathematics. We believe that each problem provides a micro example for practicing the skills of learning. And here you can also see how the trivium of grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric all work together when they're solving a math problem. The students demonstrate that they have mastered the math terms used, we call that grammar, and that they understand the rules and strategy of the problem so they can solve the problem, we call it the dialectic or logic. And finally, they explain how they solve the problem rhetorically. This is the rhetoric, demonstrating that they understand the algorithm. When I am in classroom with the students, when the students ask questions, one of the things I ask students to do is for them to demonstrate that they understood the concept by explaining and justifying each of the steps to me. It is one thing for them to know the procedural steps to solve the problem. It is another for them to know why they must take those steps. And it is very important that they demonstrate their mastery of the concept by explaining how they solve the problem using accurate math terms. And here's our overview of our math, the math courses here at Veritas. So you notice here that this is the traditional regular track according to California standard. And the Veritas regular track is already 1 year more advanced. And then Veritas Accelerate track, where you start from Algebra 1 as a 7th grade and then finish with the AP Calculus BC as a senior. This is 2 years ahead of the regular track that's California standard. We use Saxon mathematics textbooks, and the research shows that Saxon math consistently yields increased retention, higher test scores, and sustained performance in higher level of mathematics. And independent research, longitudinal studies, and field testing provide clear evidence that Saxon works. And you could actually find the evidence of that, all the research that they have done, if you go to this website, www.hmhco.com/programs/Saxon-math. So if you go to their website, it has the documents that you could take a look get the studies and the research that they have done using Saxon math. And it is our also in our students, we find that the Saxon math has worked. They consistently tested higher than the national average in all the standardized testings, including SAT math as well. And here you can see how our Veritas students, they have scored an average score of 714. This is the average SAT score. This data has been collected over the span of August 2018 through December of 2020, the most recent SAT scores that our students have taken so far. And this is the average score from the same period of time. So the national SAT math average score was 573, and Veritas, the math average score was 714. So here you could see how our students have scored consistently higher. So here is our overview of math department, and thank you so much.
My name is Joy Lee. I'm in 10th grade at Veritas, and I'm currently in pre-calculus. What makes math at Veritas different for me compared to other schools is that Mrs. Kim always relates what we learn back to God. We don't just learn about equations and formulas or how to solve for x, but we truly learn how all of those things reflect God's creation and how He made everything good, true, and beautiful. The fact that we're able to come up with solutions just shows how we're able to make sense of the world that God created. And Mrs. Kim always allows us to marvel at God's creation through mathematics.
Hello, my name is Hannah Kim, and I'm a senior at Veritas, currently taking Calculus BC. I've enjoyed learning calculus this year, not just because it's shown me the power of mathematics and the things you can do with derivatives and integrals and just calculus itself as a tool for determining the areas and volumes and mapping even the motion of objects. But I think what makes learning calculus at Veritas slightly different from any other school is because we realize that these things and mathematics reflect the wisdom of our Creator God. He has given us mathematics as a tool by which we can understand His creation, and it's almost like a language through which we can understand how truly orderly His universe is and how truly wise and gracious He is to us in giving us the ability to use these things for our own purposes. And so that's what I've been learning this year at Calculus and why I've enjoyed it, particularly at Veritas.
This is a pizza. As students, we were tasked with finding this area, C, D, B. And we were given two pieces of information that the diameter is 12 inches and that the line AC equals 5 inches. So the first step to figuring out this problem is figuring out the angle of B, which we found by taking the inverse tangent 12/5, and the answer is 22.62 degrees. And then we divided the unknown area into a sector and two unknown right triangles.
So then we determined the area of the sector first, sector CV, this part of the circle, by using the measure of the arc and then creating a proportion over the diameter of the circle as a whole. And then we multiplied that proportion by 36 pi, which is the area of the circle of the whole, because the area of circle is pi r squared and the radius is 6. So 36 pi times the proportion made from the arc over the whole circumference gave us the area of this sector, which is about 14.2125
So
inches.
let me ask you, how did you determine the arc length?
There's a geometric theorem or something that the arc angle is 2 times angle B.
That's the inscribed angle. Angle B is things, okay.
We got the angle of the arc.
And then what'd you do with that?
Then you just create the proportion. Well, actually, we created the proportion using 360 degrees with the.
Okay. All right.
And then we determined the area of these two right triangles using the angle of B and the measure of this radius. So we had to find the base first, and we did that by multiplying the sine.
The base of what?
The base of these, the right triangle.
And that's where in the diagram?
It's this line right here.
Okay, go ahead.
So we found that by using sine of 22.62, and we multiplied that by 6. And we found the height by the Pythagorean, so square root of 36 minus base squared.
Pythagorean theorem, you mean?
Like, because
Yeah.
a squared plus b squared equals 6.
Okay.
And then we found the area of this triangle, and we multiplied that by 2, and we got the value 12.78.
Okay, so what is your height? Is the height, where's the height on the diagram? Okay, so that's the height and the base. Okay, so you found the height using the Pythagorean theorem, correct? Okay. And then you multiply that by 2.
Yes.
So that's the area of both of them?
Combined.
Combined? How do you know that those two triangles are equal triangles though? Or congruent triangles?
Because these are both right angles, and if you flip, it's symmetrical.
Because the radius is the hypotenuse of both, and they both have the same base.
Okay, so those are two congruent triangles. Okay, go ahead.
Caroline?
Yeah. And now we take the area of the sector we got from step 3 and the combined area of the two triangles from step 4. We get a grand total of 26.9925 exclamation point and smiley face.
Oh, Caroline.
Caroline.
All right, so here's our Caroline. Okay. All right, well, I think the answer is correct, and thank you.
Hello, my name is Marcelino Salazar, and I teach secondary math and science. At this time, we're going to look at the science portion of education at Veritas Classical Academy. First of all, what is science? A definition we use is, science is the process of using observations, experiments, and reason to develop mental models, which you may know as theories. So what are theories? Theories are the best explanation of scientific evidence. Theories are a foundation of science that lead to hypotheses which are tested and analyzed to determine if a theory is sufficient to account for the majority of the scientific evidence. To what end? Truth. Well, how do we know what truth is? Let's ask the students. Class, how do we know truth?
By using direct observation, valid reasoning, and divine revelation.
William, what is direct observation?
Direct observation is using your five senses and personal experience to find truth.
JP, what is valid reasoning?
When you use logic to find the answer that makes sense.
Ben, what's an example of divine revelation?
God's creation.
Jinsu, what's another example of divine revelation?
The Holy Bible.
Science is a tool to be used to teach us truth, that is, the reality of the physical universe. Ultimately, science should lead us to some understanding about God. Let's try that again. What do we learn about God from physical reality? Romans 1:19 through 20 states, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, and the things that have been made." God is spirit, and we cannot see him as we are with our own eyes. Yet God makes himself clearly known to us through his creation, from which we're able to see his eternal power and divine nature. God is sovereign, mighty, and holy, and through creation we can know that God exists. We also need the Holy Bible to learn more about God, his creation, sin, and salvation. Let's see how learning about creation works out in the classroom. Here's some work from the science class. We did a lab on erosion. On the left is a list of soil types and conditions that we tested, and on the right are the observations that the students made as we performed the test. Let's see some of the students performing these tests. We might need some more water, Ryan.
It's like
Looks like it's a landslide, mudslide.
Yeah, there we go.
There it is. You
can pour more water. Oh my.
Sorry.
Okay. I think we were just gonna completely pour it.
Oh yeah. Whoa.
I think that's too much.
I don't know, that's not too much. During the lab, students have guidance and are able to give input. This allows for students to stay within the boundaries of the topic and at the same time take ownership of their learning. In this lab, you may have noticed a different setup in the second clip. After we have tested a few conditions, the student asked about alluvial fans and if we could create one. Several of the students agreed, so we created a setup and tested it, as we see in this picture. Next, we're going to move on to the physical science class and look at balloon cars.